Yeah. If I had a time machine so I could take you in and take you back to the 70s, you'd never want to come back again. You wouldn't.
There's a feeling back then that I don't know if anybody will ever understand.
It was as close to Greenwich Village on the West Coast that we had.
Actually, they were like hippies, what you consider hippies.
Venice was full of crazy people.
Nobody's gonna stomp on my damn dream. I'm going no matter what.
I could have written a whole nother book on the ambiance of Venice and Santa Monica at that time.
There was, I'm going to say, a general revolution in social thought.
Venice was the capital of the hippie movement.
It was the last stop before jumping in the ocean, is what the reputation was.
I don't know, I just wanted to go to the West Coast, you know, just sand, palm trees. You know, you're a kid, you're thinking crazy thoughts.
California itself was a stunning change for me from any place else.
It allowed you to be yourself. You could dress like you want, be who you want.
I wanted to do my thing, but I wanted to do it my way.
It was like living the dream, man, when I going to California.
Anything would go. There was no restrictions on anything you wanted to do.
Might as well just go for the ride and enjoy it and have an awesome time. And I did.
The world that I lived in for those years was the best world I ever lived in.
What got me to Southern California was, without question, bodybuilding. That was my dream.
It was bodybuilding, Gold's Gym, West Coast, California.
And immediately getting in there, you can feel the vibration, the atmosphere.
That's exactly the sense that you got when you were in
Gold's Gym, Venice, Santa Monica, and the pier. Everything revolved around there.
And anywhere we go, people look like, my God, where those guys come from? What planet? Planet Gold's pretty much what it is.
So I got to California, the very first place I went to was Gold's Gym.
It had an aura, and it had a special charisma.
And it had what you can't buy, which is a gestalt, a feeling about it.
And the will to train there felt like, totally like you just fell down with a parachute to the perfect place.
I was a few months shy of 14 in the summer of 1974, licking my wounds from a first love that ended in heartbreak. At an age when most adolescent boys are forming their identities, I felt as if the material I was to fashion mine out of was already shattered. The superheroes in the comic books I read in my youth, with their tales and deeds of bravery, strength, and valor, seem so vapid now, a mocking legacy of my belief system that led me to this point, rather than a roadmap to go forward into the adult world. Despite all that, I retreated back to a well-worn issue of a certain comic, probably more out of habit or memory than anything else. A funny thing happened though. I think I actually felt like I found my answer, but but not in the panels of the main story, but in the back. Amidst the ads for X-ray specs and backyard submarines, I saw a real-life superhero, a real human being comprised of flesh and blood, but whose exterior rivaled and even surpassed that of the masked and costume versions I had spent countless afternoons studying and reading about. In those unreal photos, I saw an answer to never feeling pain again. The layers upon layers of muscle could, to my adolescent mind, block out fear, self-doubt, pain, and heartache. An added bonus of all this superhuman power would be that I would become what the ad from the muscle building courses promised. I could be somebody special. At about the same time I discovered the world of muscles, a book had been published, and for the first time had exposed the small, often maligned subculture of bodybuilding to the mainstream public.
The book was a national bestseller. Supposedly, I've heard this said by the publisher, the biggest selling book about a sport with photographs in it in the history of American publishing. I mean, it sold over 6 million copies in the first 2 years, which is a phenomenal number of copies to be sold for a book about something as outre as bodybuilding. And they all worked out at goals.
The author, Charles Gaines, wrote of a tiny gym in a part of Los Angeles that locals regarded as funky and offbeat, derelict, and a bit dangerous, a place that had seen better days. Venice, California had always been a magnet for artists, dreamers, fugitives, oddballs, loners, and the ones who just wanted to get a fresh start or just disappear. It was the perfect petri dish to incubate the coming revolution.
There's several catalysts that completely changed bodybuilding and brought it from that little 2,000 square foot gym to the world. And part of that change was instigated by George Butler and Charles Gaines.
Well, we decided to structure the book around 2 competitions. One for the Mr. Universe competition that year, and one around the Mr. Olympia competition.
Early on, before they did Pumping Iron, I was staying with Arnold one summer. And Arnold, they had contacted Arnold, and we were sitting on the floor of Arnold's living room discussing what the book might be. And of course, I, having been through this with many, many people in various ways, I was a complete, he's out of his mind, this can't go anywhere, it's a waste of time.
When George Butler came and Charles Gaines, they came and immediately I got the vibrations. These are real people. They mean it. They're going to do what they want to do. And that convinced me that is happening.
And in the course of doing that, it just turned out that we had, wonderful luck with it, and we came up with a great, great material for a book.
But what happened was when George Butler flew to Los Angeles to meet Arnold and me, and we met, I think they came to the gym the first time, and then, they say, we want to do this. We want to make a pumping iron.
So that book, what I didn't know was that both Gaines and Butler were very well connected within the literary world.
Before the book came out, we hired a publicist named Bobby Zarin, who was at that point, he was in New York. He was the top publicist in New York and the best in the business. And he cost us an arm and a leg, but it was well worth it.
They were very interesting guys, and Arnold, of course, went along with it. So that was, again, Arnold saying yes was the difference between a revolution starting and no revolution.
It was like a lightning strike. It just happened to hit the right time with the right person, Arnold.
Arnold then took it to the bigger world. But if any of these things didn't happen, there would have been no fitness revolution as we know it.
I come down during the summer from San Francisco and stay with my aunt in Los Angeles, and I go down to the beach and watch those guys work out.
And I always liked Santa Monica. As a kid, my parents would always take me to Santa Monica to stay for a month out to Kensington, right on the beach, by Muscle Beach with Steve Reeves and all those guys.
The people who hung around the beach were sort of shady, and like a lot of leering and perverts hung around the bodybuilders. They were attracting an unsavory element, according to the people who ran the city. They wanted an excuse to get rid of it anyway.
Events, both actual and rumored, of Muscle Beach's seedy underbelly would eventually lead to its closure.
1959, the weightlifters, a couple of them got involved with 2 runaway black girls. They were underage. They took the weights off there and it just dried up.
Even with the star power of Mr. Universe winners Steve Reeves and Reg Park, both who portrayed Hercules on the silver screen, bodybuilding and bodybuilders had an image problem. Unable to control its narrative to the mainstream, bodybuilders were usually portrayed like this.
Isn't this ridiculous? Do you believe that?
Swimming upstream against decades of ridicule and ignorance, 2 books were written by the same author that probably had more to do with bringing bodybuilding to the mainstream and respect to the sport itself than anything else.
The novel Stay Hungry came out in '72, and it was a big success, and was nominated for the National Book Award. And somebody at Sports Illustrated read the novel and called me and asked me if I'd do a story about bodybuilding. The magazine had never run a story about bodybuilding, or even thought about running a story about bodybuilding. But they thought it'd be interesting, and would I do it? And I said, sure, let me look around. So I was friends with Eddie Jubenville at that point, who was a bodybuilding promoter in Massachusetts, Holyoke. And I called Eddie, and he said, well, we got a Mr. East Coast contest coming up in a month or so. And I'd be happy to have you down here. You can cover that. A month or 2 before this photographer named George Butler had gotten in touch with me, and he'd read Stay Hungry. And he said, you know, if you ever get a chance to do something on this, I'd love to take the photographs for it. So I okayed it with Sports Illustrated, and he and I and our wives went down there, and it turned out it was a great show. And everybody was talking about this Austrian who had just come over to the U.S. and was winning everything. He'd already won Mr. Olympia. We made up our minds that we were going to try to get an assignment to go down and meet this Austrian guy. And so the story came out in Sports Illustrated. There was a lot of attention paid to it. It was the first one they'd ever done on bodybuilding. George got some great photographs. So then I went to a magazine, now defunct, it's no longer around, named Oui, O-U-I, the French, yes. Told them about Arnold and said there's a Mr. Olympia contest coming up in New York at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and we want to go down and cover it. And they said, great, go ahead. So we went down, met Arnold, and got to know Arnold. At that point, George and I thought, you know, there's more than just a couple of magazine articles in this. There's really a book in this. And if we could follow these guys around on the competitive circuit for the Mr. Universe or the Mr. Olympia or whatever competition, that'd be book-length material. Sandy Richardson was my editor, and he was the head of Doubleday. And Stay Hungry had done really, really well. So I went to Sandy and said, I want to do this book about bodybuilding, nonfiction book about bodybuilding. Got a great photographer who's going to work with me and so forth. And Sandy said, look, we love you. You did a great job with your first book. We want to be your publisher forever, but not that. Said, nobody's going to want to read that but homosexuals and deviants. And, you know, I said, no. So we went to, I think 1, maybe 2 other publishers in New York, and they turned it down flat. And I sort of given up on it. And I was down in Key West a few months later, visiting a friend of mine, a writer named Tom McGuane, and at Tom's house was this young Sicilian agent from New York named Bob Dattilo. and he was a friend of Tom's. He wasn't his agent, but he was a friend. And I was telling them this story about, you know, how we'd struck out. And Attila said, I'll sell it for you. I said, I'll guarantee you I can sell that book. So went back to New York, and he got us an appointment with Dan Green, who was then, I think he was the associate vice president of Simon & Schuster, and way up in the hierarchy. We went into Dan's office with Attila, and George and I pitched this idea, and I'd already decided I wanted to call it Pumping Iron. I remember he had his feet up on his desk, and he listened, didn't say a word. And we left the office, and I said, well, it's going to be another turn down. And Attila said, no, he bought it. He ate it, hook, line, and sinker, believe me. And sure enough, 2 hours later, Attila gets a call from Dan, and he says, I'm in, guys. So it was a very gutsy publishing move. I mean, in fact, in my long career as a writer, the gutsiest publishing move I've ever seen anybody make. I don't think anybody knows how to account for that. A big part of it was due to George Butler's untiring efforts to publicize it. And he did things like, we started taking Arnold into lanes, which was like, you know, bringing a bull into a china shop, really. It was a famous literary restaurant in New York at that time, where all the movie stars hung out. Everybody who was anybody in New York hung out at lanes at one point or another. And he charmed himself into it. He was never uncomfortable. It didn't matter who you brought in. You could bring in a senator from Nebraska or the vice president of the United States or anybody. Arnold was going to get along with him and charm him.
Arnold would be just as comfortable sitting with a storefront pastor in Watts as across the table from the Pope. It makes no difference. In his mind, there is no difference. They're just two people.
I took Kurt Vonnegut, the wonderful American novelist, and his wife, Jill Crimmins, who was a great photographer, and Terry Bradshaw, the football player, a whole group of people from the lanes one night to a bodybuilding competition, the first one they'd ever seen. And so bodybuilding got to be chic all of a sudden. It got to be hot. It was a hot topic in New York. So that had a lot to do, I think, with the success of the book, because by the time the book actually came out, he was already a minor celebrity on his way to becoming a major celebrity in New York. The buzz that it had created around Arnold and the heat that it created helped to make it a bestseller right out of the blocks. Second week it came out, it got on the bestseller list and stayed on it forever.
Coming from Cincinnati in 1970, Venice was a different world.
Of course, there was the glamour of the beach, the women, the sun, and growing up in Chicago, which we had Lake Michigan, but it was like 3 months of the year. So it was really a tremendous draw for me.
My first impressions of Venice, California was, I don't like it.
Venice was a little strange at the time because Venice had a lot of hippies. And I saw people tripping out on drugs walking down the streets, which I'd never seen in my life.
I didn't like going down the boardwalk. It was people who were weird to me.
And it had a really off-color reputation at the time. It was considered the drug haven of Los Angeles.
You had skateboarders and you had all these other people down on Venice Beach. You had the artists who painted the sides of the building with these beautiful murals that they covered up already. And Venice was, they called 70s like the era of free love and free expression. And it was creative. And yes, every artist and every person that had any creativity, including bodybuilders or artists or painters or skaters or musicians, all would gather down there. And this is where they had their audience.
It grows on you in a way that they feel like, oh my God, you feel like you got out of jail. You feel like you got the freedom now. Oh, I can do everything here. And that was incredible.
It was cheap. You could get a $100 apartment on the beach.
When I lived in Venice, right on Dudley Avenue, it had wall-to-wall carpeting, it had a fireplace, dishwasher. Come on, man. Underground parking, security building. Open up the windows. What do I see? Hey, the Pacific Ocean. Boy, you must have paid a lot for that. $180 a month. And I was getting $200 a month from Joe. That paid the rent, and I had my money from the job. I mean, that's absolutely living the dream.
I had a little studio apartment just across where Gold's Gym is now, just across the street. It was like $110 a month.
I moved into a 3-bedroom right off the Speedway, and it was 3-bedroom, 2-bath. It was $175.
At that time, Venice was down on its ear. It wasn't the expensive paradise for some as it is today.
There'd be people, clowns, mimes, people rollerblading, all kinds of parties on the beach. It was a 24/7 party, and the bodybuilders were right in the middle of the mix of it, too.
A fun place to live. A bodybuilder, nobody noticed. He was just one of the odd assortment of fruits and nuts that you'd find in a bohemian atmosphere. It fit right in.
Frank Lloyd Wright said that it was his contention the United States was tilted, and everything loose ends up here. And I think the loosest of the loose all ended up in Venice.
When I landed in Los Angeles, and I felt the warmness in the air, and then the light outside, the sun, and then I walked down to where somebody waits with the car, and Arnold came out of a Volkswagen with a big Hawaiian shirt. I thought I was in La La Land.
Look at the hippies. The hippies didn't operate in a vacuum. You know, they affected everything. Rock and roll affected everything. In other words, the things that people thought about.
It was a real bohemian culture.
We had a restaurant right by, I'm sure they talked about it, by the weight pit called the Germans. And you could get a 7-egg omelet with, I think Ken talked about it, ham and cheese omelet with toast, coffee, and whatever for $1.35. And they would feed the bodybuilders. And it was owned by a guy and his sister, both Germans, and she was a really pretty girl, blonde hair. She wore a tank top, but every time she reached to give her your food, she had this big hairy armpit hanging out. I'll never forget that. It's like, you don't see this stuff in Bakersfield.
You could go to the local restaurant and eat breakfast, steak and eggs, rare and scrambled, a cup of coffee, and a bran muffin, I'll never forget, for $1.29. It was just perfect for a guy, especially a bodybuilder. You didn't have to have a lot of motivation beyond eating and getting to the gym and laying on the beach.
Well, what it was like was magic. You know, it was almost better than any reality that I would have imagined.
That dream, it just came true. I mean, I was actually living that dream. How many people get a chance to live their dream? Or if they have a dream at all?
I would go on weekends to Gold's and I discovered it. And I'm not quite sure at this point how that was. If I had read about it in a magazine and searched it out.
First time I became aware of Gold's, I was visiting in California in 1969.
Joe Gold opened it in 1965 because I used to go down and train at Venice Beach or Vince's gym during the summer.
The gym was Vince's gym in the Valley. Most of the winners of local competitions came out of Vince's.
That was the place to be. Larry Scott was there, the movie stars were there, Don Hovler was there, Dave Draper was there.
Vince got a tremendous amount of publicity from the Weider magazines.
You know, when you walked in, it was like a who's who. Like, oh shit, man, I'm at Vince's gym now. Now it's time to work out.
This Geranda was somebody who deeply thought about bodybuilding. And he thought about how to train in both with nutrition and with exercise. And he had way ahead of his time, maybe 30 years in a lot of ways. But he was really a trainer. Joe Gold at the other side, what he loved was having a place for his friends to train, build equipment, and play volleyball.
I was training at Bill Pearl's gym. I want to mention that for sure because that was my first introduction to a real gym. And Bill Pearl and his brother and all those guys really taught me how to train. And then they said to me, someone came in and said, you ever been down to Gold's? I said, I've never heard of Gold's. I don't know what that is. You should go check it out.
I had never heard of it. Even growing up as a bodybuilder in Cincinnati, Ohio, and training for years, I had never heard of Gold's Gym.
The pendulum swung away from Vince with the arrival of Arnold.
I'd been reading the magazines. Gold's Gym was the place to go. It was calling it the Mecca of Bodybuilding, and it was coming out in Weeder's magazines. And you didn't hear about any place else. So people were congregating to the Mecca. And that's where I wanted to go.
It wasn't really a business. At the other end, Joe was he was a guy that kept up the equipment. He knew lathes and welding and all of these things. So he built everything in that gym.
I looked at these incline benches. Not only was perfect, but you could adjust them. And that was made by Joe Gold himself. And Joe Gold will come to me and says, Franco, anything you need, just tell me, I make it for you.
Joe Gold created the original atmosphere that became the seedbed for all that to happen.
I was a charter member, one of the ones that Joe Gold said, $40 a year, you are a charter member forever.
I would go in the Golds, it was wonderful. Joe Gold made the best equipment.
Well, part of his charm was its unpretentiousness. The gym was kind of a hodgepodge of equipment. I think there was one kind of not very well used Nautilus machine in there at the time. A lot of old iron lying around, but it had everything you needed.
It was just different than any place I've ever, it wasn't like you see these clubs now, even the Gold's gyms now, it's not like that. This was a pure, you're in there for bodybuilding.
The absolute Mecca of bodybuilding. Everybody wanted to go there. Everybody wanted to be seen there.
This is really different. This is the place. This is the mega of bodybuilding.
That's hitting the nail on the head. That's exactly right. That's exactly the sense that you got when you were in Gold's. This was a collection of people who loved what they were doing, and it was almost like a church to them. And it was not, they had to make money, they had to break even, but that was not the main concern. The main concern was creating an atmosphere and an environment where people could do at the top level what they wanted to do.
And that alone immediately feel like getting a pump before you touch the weights.
Joe Gold sold the gym after about 4.5 years of owning it. He sold it in 1970.
I actually looked at quote buying it. I couldn't figure out how it was going to break even.
It wasn't making money, never made money, and I think he was just tired of dealing with it.
He would literally have given it to me, in other words, just to make payments. I didn't like I had to come up. I think the whole thing was $50,000.
Joe Gold had the gym from 65, and I think in 1970 Joe sold it to Bud Danitz and Dave Sachs.
This fellow that was a member, Dave Sachs, had a friend in Chicago that had some money and wanted to move to California.
I'm a lifelong friend of Dave Sachs, who was one of the partners with Bud Danitz.
So Joe had put up notice that he wanted to sell the gym, and Dave Sachs, and the fellow's name was Bud Danitz, bought the facility and tried to turn it into a modern gym, which never worked. Was wrong for the time. I only had 2 parking spaces.
They left it as it is. So the gym stayed exactly the same, the workouts and all that, except like Bud Danitz was an importer of antique furniture from England.
Dave and Bud had it for about a year. They couldn't do anything with it. I was working the front desk part-time for them.
They just did not make it economically viable to continue.
In 1971, Gold's Gym was either going to close or be sold again.
In 1972, when I bought it, early 72, it was about to close down. Danitz, who controlled the business at that point, tried to sell it off, and he came to me, I think, as a last resort.
And they ended up selling it to Ken Sprague.
Danitz was desperate. He was either going to sell the business or close the business down within a week to turn the building into an antique store. When Danitz purchased Gold's in the business, it was one building, but he had the foresight to buy the house next door to Gold's and the vacant lot next door to that. So he had 3.5 lots a block from the ocean. I had to come up with $15,000. And the structure was $15,000 to Danitz. I assumed the liabilities, which included the mortgages on the buildings. Grand total, including the $15,000, was $74,000.
And Ken was in there, and I was in there working out, and he asked me, he says,
Between a set of curls, I said, Waller,
if you run this gym, he says, I'll buy it. I says, you got a deal.
I didn't want the gym to close.
And that's how I become the manager of Gold's Gym, and Ken Sprague become the owner.
I had no idea of making any money or making it a famous place, because at that time it wasn't a famous place. There were lots of gyms around that had a greater reputation in '72. Vince's in the Valley, Pearl's in Pasadena.
Ken Sprague and his wife decided to sponsor bodybuilding shows by Gold's Gym, which really elevated the name of the gym, and it put it on the map.
There was a tremendous range of contests that we promoted. When I bought it in 1972, Gold's had never sponsored a contest.
When you take a gym like that really had nothing, it was a small building at the beach and no one really knew about it, and you start doing shows with it.
The first contest is one no one ever heard about, the Mr. Western America contest. It was, I positioned it in a place on the Sunset Strip called Ciro's, which used to be a comedy club sort of place, a nightclub. I hired Arnold Schwarzenegger and Ken Waller as my guest posers, gave them each $50.
Ken, again, was, I'm going to say, completely opposite with Joe Gold. Ken was all about marketing.
And then Joe Weider comes and shoots all of his training shots in the gym, and then those magazines go worldwide, and then people all over the world say, oh my God, you see Gold's Gym, it's the Mecca of Bodybuilding. Everybody's there. That publicity is what's made it known. Then everybody wanted to come and train there. So everybody did. You had all the guys from all over the world.
Well, I remember Kenny Sprague. Ken was the owner of Gold's when I came. Well, first of all, good business brain. Second, his dynamic personality, taking a Gold's Gym from just being a gym into the public awareness.
In a sense, it ended up in the perfect spot because marketing was a missing ingredient.
But again, no one had heard of the place. I didn't anticipate making any money. I was just hoping that I wouldn't lose so much money.
Something came to me. At that time, Gold's Gym never had a t-shirt. They didn't have anything, no logo, no nothing. And I says, and I want to make some t-shirts, so I need a logo.
That t-shirt, Ken Waller came up with the idea.
Actually, Rick Drayson, a lot of people don't know this, actually made a drawing for me.
I think we ordered initially about half a dozen t-shirts. I thought, who would want a Gold's Gym t-shirt?
I came up to this area, which is Oakland, and I went to a bar, nightclub, or whatever, and there was a band up there called Mr. Clean and something. I said, get yourself a Mr. Clean bottle and make me a drawing of Mr. Clean with a barbell.
Here's how that happened. I had designed the Gold's Gym logo in 1973 on a napkin in Zucchi's Deli with Ken Waller and Arnold. I think Ken Sprague might have been there.
He gave an artist, Rick Drayson, a gym member, a Mr. Clean bottle. He says, I want the t-shirt to look like this, except with a barbell.
So Rick made a bald-headed man, looked sort of like Mr. Clean with a lot more muscle, and he put a barbell in the middle of it, and the barbell was straight. I said, everything's good, Rick, except we're just going to bend the barbell. And that's where the original logo came from that we put on the Gold's Gym stuff.
Mr. Clean will clean your whole house and everything that's in it. Mr. Clean, Mr. Clean, Mr. Clean.
And sure enough, that goofy old Gold's Gym logo was born.
So they printed up all these shirts, maybe a dozen or two, and they sold them all out the first day.
Well, slowly we'd get letters from people around the country, can I buy one of those t-shirts?
So they said we need more, and Ace Trophy started printing more.
And it built from there, and then thousands, by the time I sold, many thousands a month would be sold.
And so they started selling more and more, and it became, over the years, the largest selling logo in the world.
The way it was set up to promote it, I tell producers, if you need a place for gym location, come on down to Gold's. You know, use the facility, free. Anytime you want to do a TV spot or a movie spot, you go ahead and use it. With one restriction, have to have a Gold's Gym t-shirt across the chest. And from that point on, that propelled it into the general public.
When I talked to Ken Sprague, he remembers it. He says, I think you paid Rick $25 to draw that thing. I said, I don't remember that at all.
I never got a dime for it. I just said, take it. I didn't realize this.
Millions upon millions of people in the City of Angels were getting in their cars every day. While out at the beach, a small group of guys were working out in a gym with no regard for what society thought of them.
My first reaction was to comic books. Charles Atlas ads in the back of the comic books. I always admired strong men, and my first movie was seeing the movie Samson and Delilah with Victor Mature. I was 6 years old.
The mightiest colossus that ever lived.
And I said, can people really be that strong, or is that really a Samson? And I started reading the Bible. There was a strong man named Samson. And then Steve Reeves came along, and I said, wow, if I'm going to be a bodybuilder, this is what he should look like, perfectly proportioned, so the people will admire you and not be a monster. And Steve Reeves was my inspiration. After seeing Hercules at 16 years old, I was hooked. Hercules! I didn't want to be anything but a bodybuilder.
When I come to the United States, I won 3 times the European, and they call it European World Powerlifting Championship. I come to Gold's Gym, and I said to Arnold, I'm the strongest. And I can do 400 bench press. And Arnold didn't say anything. You know, I'm walking around like I'm really the strongest guy. I met a guy who was in the gym training, Steve Machinian was his name, a friend of Joe Gold. And he says, can I train with you? I say, yeah, in bench press. There were 4 plates. I said, let me move 1 plate. No, leave it there. It's 405, 405 pounds in bench press. He lies down and does 10 reps. I can only do 6 or 7. And I looked at Arnold, and Arnold doesn't say anything. You know, then Ken Boland goes. Ken Boland, I'm doing 315 in incline bench for 10 reps. And Ken Boland says, can I train with you? I say, yeah. He lies down and he does 12, 15 reps, more than I do. And I turn around and I'm looking around and I say, Arnold, I say, who are these people? And he looks at me and says, let me explain you something. Never say you're the strongest again.
I started very early with physical sort of training. My mother took me to ballet classes when I was 5 years old. I was a boxer, I was a high school basketball player. At the time, I was offered a scholarship to the University of Kentucky, which is the big time in basketball, was the big time in basketball at that time. I took instead a track and field scholarship to the University of Cincinnati, my hometown. But along with that, a lot of Olympic lifting, and I think the lifting really helped me in sports. I was always into sports, and bodybuilding was kind of second nature for most of the time. Decided to go to California, got there with $10 in my pocket. I had to spend my big nest egg, my $80 when I left Cincinnati. I wound up in a snowbank and had to be pulled out, but I wound up with $10 when I got to California. That was 1969. I moved to the beach, loved the beach, which was natural then to go to Gold's, which was right at the beach. So we waited until the manager that day left for lunch, and my buddy and I snuck in and trained and left before the manager got back. But that was my first awareness of goals.
When I was a senior in high school, I was a wrestler, and I wrestled a guy from Evansville North, and the guy pinned my biggest competitor in my area in 16 seconds. From that day on, I started lifting weights. I gained 30 pounds the first year I started lifting weights and growing like crazy. Went down to Western Kentucky, and they didn't even have weights down there at that time. I walked on actually at Western Kentucky and told the coach when I went down there, I says, if I make your team, you pay for it. If I don't make it, I'll pay for it. I actually was on the only undefeated team they've ever had down there, who went to the Tangerine Bowl and won that. And then the following year as a junior, I was captain of the football team down there. And that's basically my history is getting into weightlifting. It was just athletics. It wasn't for bodybuilding at all.
I started lifting weights when I was 14 years old. I was 4'9", 110 pounds. My sisters had a fight for me, and my father was a professional fighter, and he was really getting pissed. It's like, kid, man, everybody's kicking your ass, man. You gotta learn how to fight, man. Looking at the magazines, Larry Scott and Harold Poole and Leroy Colbert and all those guys, like, wow, I need to look like that. They looked at me like, kid, there's no hope. Oh yes, there's hope. You gotta have hope. If you don't have hope, you got nothing. I bought this book by Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking. I read that book over and over again, and I filed over the excerpts that I wanted to read, and I'd read them every night before I went to bed. If you keep saying you can't, you won't. You gotta say, I can and I will. It took me like 5 years to win the Mr. America. How many people are gonna like hang on like, oh shit, I gotta wait that many years and I gotta keep training like a madman? I kept trying to tell people, this is who I am. You can't change it. I'm not gonna be a lawyer. I'm not gonna be a doctor. I'm not gonna be a banker. That's not it. It's not gonna happen. If you wanted to be a bodybuilder at that time, you had to be in California. So got in my little Ford Pinto that I paid $2,250 for, brand new. So I drove that little Pinto as fast as I could to get to Los Angeles, baby.
My first person that influenced me to becoming a bodybuilder was Reg Park. You know, I was brought up in South Africa, in Johannesburg. Reg Park was the greatest bodybuilder in the world at the time. When I saw Reg at 11 years of age, I said, that's how I want to look one day. Reading the muscle magazines, the Weeder magazines, everything was about Gold's Gym. And Gold's Gym was like this thing that you had to go to Gold's Gym to make it. So I arrived in California in 1975. And when I walked into the Gold's Gym in Venice, the first original Gold's, it was like all of these bodybuilders that I'd read about as a kid popped out of the magazines. And they actually looked bigger and more impressive than in the actual magazines.
I'm from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, a little town called Plymouth. Plymouth Carver High is where I went to school. Played sports there. My wrestling coach decided to take me to a gym a couple of towns over during the summer. It's called Bob Backus Health Club. Bob was an Olympic silver medalist in the hammer throw. The new equipment that was just coming out was Nautilus. So needless to say, after working out on that equipment for a couple, 3 months, my body started to change. So I entered a competition up in Holyoke, Massachusetts. First competition, I took third. And I said, this is kind of interesting. Boyle Cole was one of the judges. He pulled me aside and said, kid, you got a great physique. You should go to California. So I got to California. The very first place I went to was Gold's Gym. So I pull up in front of the building. There's no parking there. So I pull on the side street and I look inside, and the window, it was all glass windows in the front, but they were all steamed up, which, you know, when you're in the gym, sweating, the steam. But I could hear the weights clanking. I tried the door, it's locked. I said, there's got to be a way of getting in there. So I go around the back, and then the door's open, so I walk up the steps into the gym. Who do I see? Arnold. Franco, Zane, Draper, Robbie Robinson, Ken Waller, Roger Khaled, Denny Gable, some of the top bodybuilders of that era. I walked in, I looked, and I got intimidated and ran out.
Now, from the man who directed 5 Easy Pieces comes Stay Hungry, an extraordinary new film that takes you into a fascinating world.
Stay Hungry had been bought as a movie by Bob Rafelson, and we needed a character to play Joe Santo. And I told Bob, the director, from the beginning, it's got to be this guy, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Bob Rafelson, I was sitting in the corner, Bob was sitting next to me, and he goes, Arnold is going to be a star, he's special.
He had not yet been discovered by America. He was only known to bodybuilders.
You know, here's a guy that discovered Jack Nicholson. I mean, if anybody's going to recognize a star in the rough, it's going to be Rafelson.
That has to be one of the craziest experiences because I got a call from Arnold. He says, come on down to Alabama and you can be in the movie. We're going to have a pose off. He says, but don't be in shape or I'm not going to use you. And I remember one part in that thing where we're coming up and I'm looking at myself. It was fine when the lights were off. It didn't have any real lights on there. Then I said, man, I should have been in a little better shape than this because I was 250 pounds. When you saw the silhouettes of me and Arnold side by side, I mean, I was way huger than he was. But then even with not training, he still looked pretty good in that film. But if I'd have been in shape, I'd have never been in that movie to start with.
You'll see when we get out there.
Because Arnold did such a good job in the film, that also helped us tremendously in getting both the book and the movie off the ground, based on Arnold's good performance in Stay Hungry.
To me, he was the most naturalistic in his acting in that movie.
I told you a while back, you can't grow without burning. I don't need this shit. Yeah, you do.
The movie has turned into sort of a cult classic. There's like a series of dominoes falling, and if one of them hadn't, none of this would have happened. I mean, just this perfect synchronicity of good luck events.
The whole tenor of things changed after the filming of Pumping Iron.
Well, after Pumping Iron, we were the darlings of Hollywood. I mean, we were on every show.
After the movie Pumping Iron came out, it seemed to me like it was, it was more accepted.
Mr. Olympia Franco Colombo for Vitalis Superhold.
You want to learn how to pump like me? It's simple. Use Superhold by Vitalis. The pump. The pump.
Pumping Iron, for example, came in to film at Gold's. That was an interesting story.
I'm not sure that he had seen the potential for his business when we were doing the preparation for the book. And we were just 2 journalists from the East Coast who were out there. We didn't mean anything to Ken. You know, he had guys wandering in off the street from the Weeder magazines who were doing stories all the time. They were not important to him, and neither were we.
The producer, George Butler, was trying to consider whether or not to film at Vince's gym, which was a contemporary of Gold's at the time, or in Pasadena, or mostly here, mostly there.
Ken was great. And we were determined to shoot most of the movie in Gold's anyway, as we had concentrated the book preparation in Gold's. But by the time we came out to do the film, the book had come out and had a big success and put bodybuilding on the map. And at that point, he was willing to do pretty much anything he could do.
Having some knowledge of the production end of motion pictures.
We were very fortunate to have Ken Sprague, who owned it at the time, who was hip to movies. He allowed us to put up lights in the gym and keep them there permanently.
Go ahead and string your lights on the ceiling. We had high ceilings. And I said, anytime you want to film, since Pumping Iron was a documentary, you just come in and essentially throw the switch for the lights and you're ready to go.
He allowed us to move equipment around and set up scenes, because this was a feature documentary. We had a lot of set up scenes.
Gold's became the focal point from that for Pumping Iron.
It was a set. It was a working set for Ken, where we couldn't have gotten that in another gym.
It's usually the superstars in the magazines that attract the attention of every neophyte trainer. Franco, Arnold, Zane. In my era, those were the guys. But human nature being what it is, it takes a spark of familiarity about something you can latch onto, someone or something you can see yourself in. And for me, it was Rudy.
I remember coming out of the YMCA, I saw a magazine, Joe Wither magazine, and I see all these big bodybuilders in the magazine, and I thought, wow, I wonder where all these guys train. And I show it to my brother, and I go, brother, do you know what is this place? And he goes, yeah, why you want to go there? I said, look what I found on the sidewalk coming out of Jack LaLanne's gym. And I show it to him, and he goes, wow, these guys are huge. And I go, yeah, I would like to go and see. And my brother took me to Gold's Gym, the first one in Pacific Avenue. And I remember walking through the sidewalk, and I look to my right, and who I see working out right in front by the door, Arnold Schwarzenegger. From that point on, I became a member at Gold's Gym, and there was a guy, Brian Davide. And then he says to me, hey, so you want to start working out over here? And I go, yes. I said, working out with all these guys, and they give you a lot of encouragement because you want to be like that. And then you talk to them, you get information, and then that kind of like drives you up to better things. After 2 years of working out at Gold's Gym, he says to me, Rudy, remember when I first met you? And I go, yeah, I remember. He says, I never thought you last this long. And I said, I told you, I mean what I said. I said, I want to be a bodybuilder too.
As a Southern California native, I figured after reading in the muscle magazines about Gold's, I would hop on the freeway and see what it was all about.
Gold's had become very famous.
The gym was, in a lot of ways, as I said, it was just a bigger scale because it was funky. It was a funky place, and it wasn't slick in any way.
It was a bigger building, taller, longer, wider, deeper.
So it had a lot of the same feeling of Venice, but probably at 3 times the square feet.
A lot of people would come by and look in and, watch the bodybuilders.
The storefront in Santa Monica, so you had all of these people walking by, and again, because of Ken's marketing, the glass, and you had people that were just all of a sudden tourists. In that period, there weren't any tourists in Venice. Santa Monica, because it was Santa Monica, was beginning to have its own tourist trade.
And business was booming. With the movement of Gold's to Santa Monica, it allowed for more customers. The original Gold's had the 2 parking spaces.
You don't realize the tremendous reach of the bodybuilding magazines and the way it fired up all the people like me originally in the Midwest and the East Coast. Everybody wanted to feed on the energy.
I moved it to 2nd Street in Santa Monica because I wanted to turn it into a home. But again, I could not satisfy that whim by giving up the facility where a lot of my friends counted on being. I had to keep the gym open, so hence the movement to Santa Monica. I'd keep the gym going. I felt an obligation to do that. We had a public parking garage across the street, and through that promotion over the years, weight training was taking off.
If you journey out to California and go to Gold's Gym, the legendary sanctum, the Cooperstown of bodybuilding, the training ground for all the California muscle beach men, and if you ask the owner of Gold's Gym, Ken Sprague, who is the greatest promoter of bodybuilding, he will tell you,
I'm the greatest promoter of bodybuilding.
And when Kenny opened up the 2nd Street Gym to women, I think that was the greatest move, because if you look at bodybuilding today, I do some training. I have a little private gym that I train. Most of my clients are women.
We had athletes, not just bodybuilders, weightlifters. We had a menagerie of individuals wanting to apply weight training to whatever pursuit, whether it be that female firefighter getting strong enough to carry a pack up a ladder, or whether it be a world-class javelin thrower.
It shows you what the cast of characters was like. We had Lisa Lyon there.
Weight training was taking off, and it meant a bigger market.
Women's bodybuilding was just starting to, so that became a place by 1979 where Rachel McClish was, and Stacey Bentley, and all those pioneers.
As serendipity will, an agent came to me and said, I think you could have a book here. I said, who's going to buy a weight training book? Well, that book, the first book that it took a couple weeks of my time, stayed in print for 25 years. Other books would follow, but all with that Gold's Gym branding on them. It became quite a source of revenue to have that brand in publishing and t-shirt sales, in memberships, contest promotions. It became quite an economic bonanza. The 2nd Street location was a smart move.
But again, it was a magic place, different, because there was a different cast of characters.
The new location of Gold's introduced new personalities. The biggest and quite possibly the most outrageous would have been Pete Grymkowski.
When Tim and myself left Rochester and were going to Florida, we got to Pennsylvania mountains, and I was passing a snowplow, and a chunk of ice from the plow hit one of the brake calipers underneath, because I had a 65 Corvette. All of a sudden I go to hit the brake because I started sliding, and the damn pedal went right to the floor. All the fluid had leaked out. So Tim and myself pulled over in this little town way up in, I don't know if it's called Lehigh, Pennsylvania, someplace. So I called GM, and they said, no, it's going to take us, for that type of car, it's going to take us a week to get it. So Tim looks at me and says, well, Pete, there's another way you can look at it. I says, yeah, Tim. I says, what's another way I can look at it? He says, maybe that means don't stop. I says, Tim, I says, wow. Want to get the hell out of here and get on the road? This is within an hour of us checking it. I said, yeah. I said, let's go on to Florida. I got almost to Florida, and coming down this big hill where you go into Savannah, Georgia, I couldn't stop that car downshifting. I shut the engine off, everything, blah, 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 And we had to put our feet out, and our shoes were honestly smoking. The nose of the Corvette hit the a pumpkin gear of a tractor trailer in front of us, which means we ducked down under the dashboard because that went over the top. It cracked the window and busted the front end on that car. I made it to Orlando. I went down and I started training at the Orange Avenue Gym. I ended up living on the roof of the Orange Avenue Gym for a while.
A remark made by Ed Connors in a casual conversation would forever change the trajectory of the lives of Ed, Pete, and their partner, Tim Kimber.
Ed Connors had come out. He told me, he says, my guy, he says, you're in tremendous shape. He says, why don't you come out and do the Mr. of America contest? And he told Joe Weider about me. He took some pictures, and Joe said, yeah, you got to get him out here. I knew that I had to live as inexpensively as possible. So I said, what does that mean? It means, but I can certainly save money if I don't have a car and I don't have an apartment. The gym was on 2nd Street. 1st Street was Ocean Avenue, and then there was the pier. So I could train from midnight to 6 or midnight to 7 in the morning, and then I could go to sleep under the pier, and on the way I would stop at McDonald's. This girl, Linda, would give me a bag of hamburgers or cheeseburgers from the night before. They'd throw them out, but she'd save them for me. Well, I would take the bag of food and go down by the pier, sit down there under the pier, eat, jump in the ocean with all my clothes on because they were soaking wet from sweating all night. An old friend of mine, Dr. Peter Siegel, Peter would hypnotize me to train all night. The hypnosis helped. It helped tremendously because I would never feel any pain. You could move mountains with hypnosis.
In the 70s, bodybuilding was still perceived as a questionable pursuit, but to those who were drawn to it, it could provide a refuge and a place to build self-esteem. For some individuals, it was a saving grace.
I didn't feel like Bill Pearl's gym was an inferior gym at all. And I felt I had every tool I needed. But it was clear that Gold's Gym was getting more media attention than Bill Pearl's gym was. I started working out at Bill Pearl's gym at the age of 15. 1 year later, at the age of 16, some friends saw a poster on the wall that said, "Teenage Mr. Compton." Go ahead, Dougie, enter that. And I took second place. But for some reason, there was a reporter there, a local reporter from a magazine called New West Magazine. And he wanted to do a story on this new phenomenon called teenage bodybuilding. And so he did a 7-page story on me, which of course completely lit my fire for future contests. My mother and father came from Chile, South America. And my father left when I was 5 years old. My mother didn't have a car. She would walk to school to walk us home rather than picking us up. And so when I found the gym, I found a lot of things that were great. First of all, I found sort of father figures, older men that, set a nice example for me. I found camaraderie. Even though I didn't have that club feeling that they had at Gold's Gym in terms of the media, there was still some great friendships that were built there at Bill Pearl's gym. At sometime around 1976, 77, 78, right around there, Gold's Gym was on 2nd Street. And there, that famous now picture of all those guys lined up in front of the Gold's Gym window. Sometime, I think there was even a convertible there, or a car with a sunroof, and one of the bodybuilders, is sticking out of the convertible top or out of the sunroof, and they're all lined up there, and I was jealous. And I wanted to be a part of that, and I sort of regretted that I couldn't be, and it would have been difficult for me to be. I mean, I could have gone once or twice, but it was clear these guys were all friends because they saw each other every day. And that's what I would have had to do, was be there every day, share their workouts with them. It's like breaking bread together. It's like, if you don't actually work out with them, you can't be part of the club. And I kind of wanted to be a part of the club.
It was great. I mean, we were like a whole family.
The camaraderie between the bodybuilders, you knew they'd always covered your back.
The relationships we molded with people and how we gelled together. I mean, it was just absolutely off the hook, man.
We looked after one another.
Everybody was such good friends that we all found a way to get by.
It was sort of like a family, all supporting one another.
There was always somebody in the gym that would help you find a job.
Bill Grant took me under his wing and was like, treated me like I was his brother.
It's like, hey, brother, how you doing? Brother from another mother, okay.
He worked at LAX, and during the day, I worked at night at the Crazy Horse. During the day, he said, man, you take my car, drop me off at the airport, use my car. You go to my apartment, take a shower, there's food in the refrigerator, kick back if you want, just come pick me up at work. I mean, this is a guy that I just met.
That's how the family worked. We worked together.
Felt like I was involved with a family who really cared and supported, and loved me.
We took care of each other. If one guy would come out and didn't have a job, we'd get him a job.
They were looking for security guards for the very first People's Choice Awards. It was amazing for all of us because Farrah Fawcett walked in. We, at the back, we were the security guards. We sat next to Barbara Streisand. John Wayne gave me his brandy glass. Wish I'd kept it.
The bond we had with guys, it was like that, man.
Even when I didn't have a car, Ken Waller went out and got it, this Oldsmobile.
Bill Grant says, hey, do you have a car for Pete? And Kenny says, yeah, this one. And it was a Ford Taurus, I think it was at the time. And Kenny said, take it. Didn't even worry about the money.
I can remember meeting Ken Waller at that gym. The most sweetest, nice guy in the world. He came in and he says, Bill, don't worry, I'll take care of everything. I'll show you where to shop, where to get your car fixed, where to buy clothes and stuff. Everything's cheap, he'll take care of you. He was really magic, man.
Waller was a great guy. We became close because I have a background in cars. I used to drag race cars, build cars, hot rod cars. And Ken had an infatuation with cars too. I had a Corvette, he had Corvettes.
I would buy and sell Corvettes and fiddle around with cars. I even did that after becoming the manager of Gold's Gym. I'd do it in the parking lot. I'd go out there and work on cars when I probably should have been in trying to sell a membership or something.
I remember when I worked at Gold's Gym, I'd get the phone call, we need somebody in Hollywood to come and do a movie part. And I'd go, I know exactly the right person. I'll get the guys. And then we would go, and I'd call Kent, and I'd say, Kent, listen, there's a movie part, and Roger Callard, and a bunch of us would go. We were always out there.
How could you not feel the love and, people reaching out for you, trying to help you? It was awesome.
There's a phone call from Molino. It's an emergency.
Ken had called, said he wanted to put on a parade, and I said, I'll come out and talk to you about it, as I do with every client. And when I got out there, I went to his place of business, the gym, and talked to him, and he told me what he wanted.
With that parade, I wanted to present bodybuilding in a fun way.
He had a bucket list of things that he wanted, a whole master list of things, and we talked about them. Some of them were doable and some of them weren't. But we ended up figuring out what we wanted to do, and I pretty much said yes to everything that he wanted to do.
But nobody had any idea what he was talking about, because, you just base off of competitions that you've seen in the past.
I never knew he could pull it off. I mean, I remember him telling me we're going to have a big parade for the Mr. America.
He had visions, this guy. Ken was like a promoter.
I don't know if it's very well known, but nothing like this had ever been done before. And Ken was a pioneer.
He puts on great shows. He's an entertainer. He's another P.T. Barnum. Thinks of outside the box. He's a genius, too. I mean, just total genius.
Nobody realized, or no one could envision what Ken Sprague was doing at the time, because we only realized all the work that he really put into it when the parade started.
We had the guy come in and build the bleachers. He had left, and Ken decided that he wanted to move the bleachers about 600 to 1,000 feet further towards the beginning of the parade. And so when I had no way of moving them, I didn't have any forklifts or anything. He said, no problem. He called for 6 or 8 of his buddies out of the gym. They came, they picked it up, and ooh, 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 and next thing you know, this thing was walking down the street.
So I captured the start of the parade, which happened down by the pier.
Kenny said, you're going to lead the parade. And I go, I am. And he said, yeah.
Pete Samra is there holding the banner at the front of the parade. And of course, I've known Pete for years.
And I didn't even realize that I was posing. Wayne got me to pose. But it was a lot of fun.
To look back on it now and wonder where he even got that idea from, I have no idea what he was up to in that one.
There were a lot of conceptions. Oh yeah, I know who bodybuilders are, etc. But if the context could be changed, that was the concept that I was looking for.
I'm thinking, oh shit, I don't know how bodybuilders in a parade, who's gonna come see us, The
Mr. America Day parade took bodybuilding into another dimension, that it was now accepted on the streets of America.
If they could bring kids and themselves along a wonderful sunny day route in Santa Monica next to the ocean, what could go wrong there for my family?
I just think that Mr. America Day really was the start of bringing America into the gym, or taking the gym into America.
When you're at the gym and you can see all these people, talking about the parade, and you can see the excitement on people's body and face, and you go like, wow, this is something great.
Bert Goodrich, the first Mr. America in an open-air car. We had our own parade. Bodybuilder had his own parade.
It actually exposed bodybuilding to the general public. And I don't think that had ever been done before. And that's why it was such an historic occasion.
So it was a way of being fun and really presenting bodybuilding to a far bigger market than had ever seen it before.
It was just a sensational piece of promotion that Ken pulled out of the bag and turned on. And it lifted bodybuilding to a whole new level.
He set out to do something. He would achieve it.
These days we have social media and internet and all these things of the modern electronic age. But back then, it was something that was like a scene out of a movie.
60 Minutes was for the parade and contest. I remember walking into the 60 Minutes news division in New York. And until that time, like bodybuilding, there was an awareness of it, but nothing really known about what's going on, especially economically. Usually contest posters were 11 by 14 at the biggest. And I walked into the 60 Minutes group and I unfolded this movie one sheet, full color one sheet. And you could see that suddenly they thought, maybe there's a story here.
What Ken Sprague did for that Mr. America was light years ahead of anything that had been done before, and it was not copied or duplicated by anybody in the following years.
The logistics were enormous at first. Who do you get to be in a parade to feature bodybuilders?
It took us about 6 months to plan it. Of that 6 months, there's probably 3 months getting approval.
But Ken was putting on a show like, I mean, people talk about, wow, they're going to have animals, they're going to have elephants, they're going to have giraffes and floats, and people are like, what?
Nothing has ever been done like this before in bodybuilding, and particularly back in the 1970s.
Didn't care what it cost. If I thought something would add to it, I did it. First, I had to find the animals. We went to some animal safari sort of place in Southern California to rent the animals.
And we have clowns and horses and bands and that kind of stuff, but it was all to do with the AAU, with the bodybuilding side of it, and he had lots of that, and that's why the floats and everything else.
He put me up on that float. I wanted to be on the elephant. He said, Bill, no, you want to be on the float, right? And it was awesome, man.
Bill Grant on top of the float, Dave Dupree on top of an elephant.
Elephants in the street, bodybuilders on elephants, marching bands.
The street's blocked off and everything, and here's a bunch of bodybuilders riding stuff. I'm surprised they didn't have them on donkeys and everything else going through there.
From that lead animal group grew the concept of marching bands, of politicians, of locking in each of those different elements of a parade.
He says, hey, you ever rode an elephant? I said, no, but I'm all for it. And, you know, I was for anything like that. You know, that looked like a great time to me.
Would you ride an elephant? I said, yes, I love riding horses. So it would be great. I went down and got introduced to the animals and worked with them and rode in the parade.
I said, yes, they told me we're gonna climb some elephants.
I remember Dave Dupree was on one.
I wore my turban because I said, this is great. I feel like Sabu. I was actually acting. I thought I was in India. That's the way my mind was working. I was completely oblivious of the parade.
Cities like Santa Monica have a parade permit that you have to go through. You have to pull the permit. And it includes the police department, the fire department, the building and safety.
You know, surprisingly, based on the history of Santa Monica and the negative conduct, how they shut down Muscle Beach in Santa Monica a decade before or so, I thought I'd have tremendous resistance. But there was none. There was just going through the process, application, police permit. It all worked out. I was surprised. I was prepared for trouble, but none whatsoever from the city administration.
We met with the Santa Monica police, who I thought, quite frankly, weren't going to approve it. But he had the clout to get him to do it.
I had to go through the police department. How many policemen do you need? I said, I probably 2. It's not going to be that big. Well, it wound up where they had to call in probably half of the police department on an emergency basis.
There was, cars lined up on the Santa Monica freeway.
There was a mile-long backup on the Santa Monica freeway, the main artery going from the beach back and forth to town.
That's how many people were there. We had movie stars, dignitaries were there, mayors were there. I mean,
every politician west of the Mississippi, it seemed like, wanted to be on a float or or horseback.
I had my mom and my uncle and my aunt, they were riding in the back of a convertible, like a 1936 Lincoln, riding down Main Street. It was a spectacle.
Yeah, what the hell? How did this work, man?
The parade was a good parade, and it was down the most important part, which was the Ocean Boulevard was the most important part, because it's what a background that is. I mean, everybody just couldn't believe to have the ocean out there.
There was all sorts of promotional activities. You had to get up on an early Sunday morning to have the pre-8 o'clock show to do a piece there to promote.
There was constant phone calls from Hollywood and from newspapers, and people would start visiting, and it started to become like a major event.
As part of the promotional build, I managed to talk a fellow named George Christie, who was an iconic entertainment writer, a gossip columnist, a trendsetter for The Hollywood Reporter. I talked him into coming to the gym to do a few sentences on the upcoming Mr. America parade and contest. He was so taken that he gave it an entire column. And what was important about that is he was a trendsetter for the movie industry crowd. If he said a restaurant was good, everybody would go to that restaurant. He gave this preview such a glowing report that we had the entire movie industry, it seemed like, trying to get in. If you're promoting something, you cannot promote it enough.
You had Tom Snyder, The Tomorrow Show, filming one of the top programs on television right from Gold's Gym at midnight, live.
They came in, and it was a live feed at the gym, and they wanted to talk about bodybuilding. And Dave Johns was there, and the first Mr. America was there. So Ken said, "You need to be in this interview. You know, I don't think these guys are they're gonna stand up with this. I think they're gonna freeze up. Man. We need somebody who's gonna talk."
Bill Grant was one of the most likable guys I'd ever met in a bodybuilding gym, or anywhere for that matter.
Throw me in there, man. I could do this stuff.
Bill was always up, always up.
It was so fun, man. I was stoked. People back, damn, man, you're on everything.
Gold's wouldn't be what it was were it not for Bill Grant. Bill was right there in the matrix of making Gold's what it was.
I remember the press was there, television was there, and they did their usual stuff. They did a few shots and off they went, but I was there for the whole day.
It seems in my observation that when it was up to bodybuilding to chronicle its own history, it would always end up with a self-inflicted wound. The bodybuilding world owes a debt of gratitude to historians like Wayne Gallish.
My father always had a good physique, and he played football and all the different sports. I suppose he was the role model for me. My interest in bodybuilding grew only because I was interested in strength and fitness. After a short period of training, the people around me in the gym encouraged me to go in a bodybuilding contest. I just wanted to get stronger so that I would be better at sport. Around about 1970, I decided that I wanted to go and see Arnold. It was advertised his last universe would be the 1970 NABBA universe in London. And I filmed that contest. Although filming wasn't encouraged, it wasn't officially allowed, I managed to get away with it. Nobody thought it was worthwhile or even worthy of spending the money on film to record the moving image, because film, Super 8 and even 16mm was much more expensive. People couldn't see any reason to be spending money to do that. They would go to the contest, they would take photographs, and they thought that was chronicling the sport of bodybuilding. Joe Weider didn't think it was necessary to be recording these contests on film. There was only the films that I got and a couple of other fans shot from the audience. So 1970 was the catalyst that got me started, and it's just kept going ever since till this day.
There were so many producers and directors there, and that helped them get an idea of bodybuilding and to think how to use bodybuilding in their TV segments or beyond. That really, I think, helped promote the sport and break down that barrier.
He had a lot of connections. He was very well liked. You know, the owner of Gold's Gym, the Mecca of Bodybuilding.
We managed to capture all the major media at that time. It's the only way to approach an event.
And it started off with a photo shoot in front of the gym with some of the top bodybuilders.
Those that couldn't get in the venue itself for the Mr. America contest managed to watch the parade and do some photos of that. And the results went out on the AP and UPI Wire. They were mentioned in the New York Times, on the Paul Harvey Show, which was an icon, and it's an iconic program in itself, 60 Minutes.
Still, he can muster troops of elephants and muscle men to parade through Santa Monica. And he doesn't do it because he likes elephants.
There you have $100,000 in gross income. $45,000 from the auditorium for ticket sales. You have $145,000. Now those are the bare minimums.
I was hoping it would make money.
When you're talking about with all the people, the 150,000 people who'll be out here on the parade route, it doesn't take into consideration the t-shirts you'll sell, the memorabilia, you name it, we'll hawk it.
It was amazing. It was an explosion.
It was the second biggest parade, next only to the Rose Parade that year in the state of California.
The amount of t-shirts that got sold was unbelievable.
I mean, they sold so many t-shirts.
On my shift from 6 to 12, I sold $1,349 worth of t-shirts.
Money's being dumped into pillowcases. It's coming in.
The money was the drawer was full with money. You'd have to take it out periodically and pour it into a bag, then put it back in and do it again.
Wound up making, I think, that day $250,000.
It was a good day. We had a big crowd, a lot of people in it. Funny things happen when you do parades, especially it's a live show. You don't get a chance to rehearse it.
You had everything converging. The parade converging on the auditorium where there would be 3,000 people waiting for the prejudging.
Bodybuilding went from being in little auditoriums or YMCA auditoriums into the Santa Monica Auditorium, which was one of the biggest or best known auditoriums in the country.
We had it at the Santa Monica Civic and the place was packed.
Dave Johns won overall. He was presented with his overall trophy by Mae West, and it was exciting to see her on stage.
And Mae West was going to be there, and I had to be there on the stage.
If I could get Mae West, she hadn't given an advance notice of an appearance for many years because she was getting old. And I knew Hollywood would come out to honor Mae West at an announced public appearance. And they sure did.
Ken told me it was hard for him to get her. He didn't know whether she was coming or not until the last day.
I put her in the media for weeks that she was going to show up. I became reasonably sure about 3 days before the event, and I was not certain till she got out of the limousine that night. But it was worth the risk. It all panned out, and I'm a worrier.
He made it so appealing to her that she had to come up because, remember, she used to have those acts with all the guys, all the bodybuilders.
A couple of good friends at the gym, Dino and his son Rudy, and I put Dino in charge of going to Mae West, whatever she needed. When she arrived, you take care of Mae West. That's your responsibility. And Mae West arrives, and her dressing room is decked out in flowers, roses, probably a dozen.
Why wouldn't she want to come to be around all these bodybuilders that she used to do the shows with?
Dino comes out with a request. I'm thinking, oh no. Well, Mae, she was just so wonderful. What she wanted, all she wanted, was some plastic cement for her phony eyebrows and eyelashes, both. But she came out on stage that night. She batted those eyelashes. Thank God for the glue. And then the next day, getting the ancillary publicity, the residual publicity going, started it all over again. Past that point, it became very easy. Gold's Gym and the parade and Mr. American Bodybuilding was firmly on the map.
That 1977 parade was one of the most fantastic parades in the state of California. It's one of the best.
The 77 parade in America was the star, in my opinion, of all bodybuilding shows. Before then, certainly, and since then. It was unique in the history of the sport.
The 77 America will always stay in my mind, I think because of the parade, the big change.
We unpack our past and travel back in time at our own peril. Dusting off memories, even for history's sake, is fraught with potholes. My journey to gold and the time I spent there did not result in me becoming a bodybuilding champion, but it did equip me in a way my university education did not. I observed and learned how people can take and seize opportunity. And I learned how to get along with people from a wide variety of backgrounds. In short, I became a man. And sometimes in this life, as we reflect on our journeys and figure out our paths forward, it's good to be able to look back to see where we've been.
If I had a time machine and I could take you in and take you back to the 70s, you'd never want to come back again. You wouldn't.
Woke up this morning, wiped the sleep from my eyes. It's time to try, I got a dream, one so big it fills the sky. I know I've got to fly, I gotta try. Dream big, stand tall, gotta give your heart, gotta give it all. Dream big, stand tall, gotta open doors, gotta break down walls. Dream big. Ain't gonna be easy, nobody's there to lend a hand to you. That's what she said. Know what you want, child.